welcome to the Debrief on ABC News Live. I'm Kimberly Brooks. Thanks so much for joining us. The Trump administration is considering possible payroll tax cuts to boost the economy. Plus, we're talking about the officer fired yesterday in the death of Eric Garner. And Eric Garner's mother is going to join us live. Plus, a disturbing story out of California with some high school students throwing the Nazi sign. But first, here are your headlines.
The measles outbreak in the U.S. jumping again. 21 new cases last week has pushed this year's totals just over 1,200. In Great Britain, health officials are turning to social media to help fight the measles outbreak there.
To fight online misinformation about vaccines following a spike in measles cases in the UK, Britain's government plans to call a summit of social media companies to discuss what more they can do. Prime Minister Boris Johnson says too many people, in his words, are listening to that superstitious mumbo-jumbo on the internet. Pinterest in 2017 blocked all searches for the term vaccines. Facebook said in March that it would no longer recommend groups and pages that spread hoaxes about vaccines and that it would reject ads that do so.
Planned Parenthood is now pulled out of the federal Title X program, which helps make contraception available to low-income Americans. The group says it could not abide by new Trump administration rules that would block it from discussing abortions with patients. E-cigarette maker Juul and tobacco giant Philip Morris are now facing a big new lawsuit over vaping. Companies are accused of illegally targeting minors with their marketing.
Dozens of air mattresses filling the air in Denver. One witness described this as the Great Mattress Migration. It was caused by heavy winds disrupting what was supposed to be an outdoor movie night, and people actually spent about 30 minutes trying to catch all of them.
Quite a sight.
We begin in Washington, where White House officials may have started discussing a push for a temporary payroll tax cut. This would serve to stop an economic slowdown, and this comes while the president continues to insist the economy is in great shape and saying, quote, "We're doing tremendously well." So I want to bring in Karen Travers at the White House. Karen, it seems the president's words are pretty optimistic, aren't they?
He is, and he has to be the cheerleader for the U.S. economy, Kimberly. One, he's the president, and two, because it's a central part of his re-election strategy. The economy is the one area where voters are giving President Trump credit and like what he's doing. It's the one bright spot when you look at most polling about his administration, personal attributes, his work on health care and immigration. People aren't happy, but on this, they are, and he knows that has to continue if he wants to get reelected. So look for the president to continue that drumbeat, saying he doesn't see a recession. You've heard his senior staff on the economy out in full force over the past couple of days, pushing back on some of these concerns that economists are raising. That doesn't mean that everything is fine, but certainly I think you're going to see the administration trying to focus on the bright spots in the economy.
Yeah, so they were talking about the possible payroll tax cuts, but what are some other options if that's not going to be used?
Yeah, and that doesn't seem to be the top option right now. White House officials were pushing back on reports that that was under consideration, saying right now it is not something they're going to move forward on. So other tax cuts could be up for discussion right now. And remember, the president in the midterm election season last fall, as he was out there stumping for Republican candidates, kept talking about another round of tax cuts. He used it in all of his campaign speeches. He said he would do a 10% tax cut for the middle class. After Election Day, when Republicans lost control of the House, the president stopped talking about it. So whether or not this is just a similar tactic now to drum up another headline, talk about some other option, we'll see if that actually comes out and actually happens.
Yeah, and, is the administration examining these Chinese tariffs? Because researchers at J.P. Morgan Chase, they just showed how these tariffs are putting taxes on American households.
The president will continue to say that it's not American businesses, it's not American consumers that are paying for these tariffs. He says that it's China paying for them, and that's just not what's happening here. We fact-check this almost every day because the president likes to keep up that message. And what happens is when the tariffs go into effect on Chinese imports, it's American companies that are bringing those products over that have to pay that extra cost. Now, they can absorb it or they can pass it down to consumers, and that's where that statistic you cited, that That's why people then end up paying more. That latest threat of tariffs on toys, electronics, clothing that were going to go into effect in September, that's been put on hold for right now. And kind of a mixed message then from the administration, saying they didn't want to have any pain for consumers heading into the holiday season, but at the same time trying to insist that it's not American consumers who are feeling any of this pain from the trade war.
All right, Karen Trivers right there at the White House. Thank you so much for joining us. And guys, we moved to that breaking news yesterday in the Eric Garner case. The New York Police Commissioner, James O'Neill, officially firing Daniel Pantaleo, the officer who used an illegal chokehold that led to the death of Eric Garner in 2014. So our Aaron Katursky was right there when the decision came down. Aaron, a death captured on cell phone and the officer responsible fired 5 years later. What do you make of this?
A time frame that everyone involved agreed was far too long, regardless of what you think of the outcome. It was 5 years. Just seems crazy, and all sides said it has to be handled differently should this happen again, although the police commissioner said it's a different city. The death of Eric Garner caused the entire police force to be retrained in the use of force and in techniques of restraint, and so he's confident that it is a different police force now than it was then. But you could tell there was a reluctance by the police commissioner. He's a street cop at heart, was a uniformed officer for 34 years. And this decision was clearly wrenching for him. Even though it seemed like the obvious outcome to many, it was really hard. And we've learned that even his top brass were kept in the dark. They found out about it the way we both did, by tuning in live to O'Neill's remarks. And it appears he kept his own counsel, kept it close to the vest, and really worked through the decision largely alone.
Yeah, and I think that's why what I want to ask you is, why was it such an emotional decision? Because you're talking about someone who lost their life, and we're just talking about an officer who's losing his job.
That's right. And you heard Eric Garner's mother reflect that sentiment in her remarks and how painful this was. And while O'Neill conceded the death of Eric Garner was a tragedy, he also had to toe a line. He doesn't want to lose his rank and file, and he wants them to know that he has their back. And that was an important message that he tried to send. At the same time, Eric Garner died and didn't have to. And you heard the police commissioner say that every time he watches that video, he wants to tell Garner, don't do it, don't resist, comply. And he wants to tell Daniel Pantaleo, don't do it. Don't keep that chokehold on after the two men hit the ground. Because the way that it was found by the departmental judge and by the commissioner, the use of force was justified under policy because Eric Garner had resisted. But once they came to the ground and Pantaleo had control, he should have released his grip on Eric Garner's neck, and he didn't. And that, the commissioner said, was reckless.
So is this justice?
Well, it's justice, I suppose, if you look at a fair and impartial proceeding, which is what the commissioner said he wanted. And he wasn't really out for justice. I think he tried to make clear that he didn't want to see a disciplinary process which involved a civil servant, which at bottom is what this was, as a substitute for the failing of the federal government to bring civil rights charges, the failing of the Staten Island district attorney to bring criminal charges, because this did seem to be a tailor-made case of reckless endangerment at the very least. And he just didn't want so much resting on this one decision. But this was all there was left for the Garner family. There was no other process. And so it became imbued with all of this significance, not just here in New York, but around the country. And the police commissioner, we're told, came to understand the national import of the decision that he was about to hand down. And it's not even the end. There are still other things pending.
So what happens next?
So there are three fronts that this will work. One, the NYPD is considering departmental charges against the sergeant who should have been overseeing this arrest and perhaps could have done things differently to avoid the escalation that was captured on cell phone video. The Garner family is pursuing a federal law to prohibit any police force anywhere in the country from using a chokehold. And then the officers' union is calling for a vote of no confidence in the mayor and the police commissioner. The police force believes that this was a political decision that left the NYPD rudderless and frozen. They called for a work stoppage or slowdown. We're not sure that that's really where the rank and file is, but that's in the potential in the offing.
All right, Aaron Katursky with the latest. And of course, this no doubt impacts the family the most. So we actually have Gwen Carr, who is Eric Garner's mother, on the phone with us right now. Gwen, so happy that you could join us today. The first thing I want to ask you is, how have you been coping, and how is your family holding up through all of this?
Well, it's been a long 5 years. And thank you for having me on. It's been long. It's been tedious. We've been running into brick walls and trying to sidestep hurdles. But at the end of the day, we're still holding up pretty good. I mean, I've been having a few breakdowns because, I had, tragedies along the way. And it's just been hard for the family.
Yeah. Yeah, I wanted to say, sorry about your husband. When we learned of that news, that was pretty sad as well. So very sorry to hear that. I wanted to ask you, what do you think of yesterday's decision when they decided to fire Officer Pantaleo?
That brought me some sort of closure. I said, this is a step in the right direction. But as I look, because, I had no foreseen information. So as I'm listening to Commissioner O'Neill going on and explaining how he made his decision, I just kept getting mixed feelings. I'm saying, he's not going to fire the officers. Then as he talked, I said, oh, yes, he is. Then, oh, no, he isn't. I mean, it was just like my heart was like jumping out of my chest. I said, so I just sat there in awe, just listening. I had some of my family members with me. And at the end, when he says, yes, that the officer would be fired, I was just, I just broke down and cried.
Yeah. Definitely.
That's all I could do is break down and cry. And all my family members, they were shouting and yelling, but I was crying.
Yes. Because that is your son. One of the things that we heard you say yesterday, you continued to say he lost his job, but your son lost his life. What do you think people don't understand about how these tragedies impact your family?
Well, see, they only see these tragedies as a news story. These tragedies are not just news stories. This is our lives. We deal with this on a daily basis. And as I said yesterday, Pantaleo lost his job, but he has other opportunities. My son will never have another opportunity. There is no justice for him. He is dead. He murdered him. So there's no more opportunities for him. And people need to understand this. And the PBA, they treat this like, their officers, no matter what they do, they're going to uphold them. If he's wrong, he's wrong. I mean, I understand you standing by your officers, but there should be a line drawn. If you can visually see that this officer does not belong on the force, he has had disciplinary actions before. The department has paid out 2 lawsuits and had a third one pending at the time of my son's death. So how do they decorate an officer like that?
Yeah. Yes, well, Gwen, we send our condolences, and we're sending lots of love to your family because, of course, the pain continues even though this decision came down yesterday. I just want to thank you again for being with us today. Appreciate your words.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
Yes, of course. So, guys, we move on. Aaron, you're still with us. You heard that. Pretty emotional to hear how the mother feels about the situation, because, again, this is just her son. This is her life, as she said.
She's been living with this for far too long, for 5 years, and that it all came down to an ordinary disciplinary process for a cop. It seems like along the way there maybe should have been something else achieved, because if we were waiting, and we heard this reflected in some of the words of her associates yesterday, if all we're doing is waiting for the cop to get fired, I mean, that seems like a long wait for a maybe unsatisfying result.
Yes. Thank you for being with us. We appreciate it. And guys, we move on. If you didn't know, American slavery began 400 years ago this month. August of 1619 was the first time it was documented when more than 20 enslaved Africans reached this country in what was then known as Virginia and were sold to colonists, something that has impacted every aspect of life as we know it. It's what the New York Times Magazine has called not only this country's original sin, but the real founding of this country in their new major interactive initiative, the 1619 Project, led by reporter Nicole Hannah-Jones. It's a retelling of history, and the project highlights a truth that many of us didn't learn when we were in school, like the essay that she wrote where she says, Britain, we may have never revolted against the British if the founders had not understood that slavery empowered them to do so, nor if they had not believed that independence was required in order to ensure that slavery would continue. So this project places Black Americans at the center of this painful story, Black Americans who have been enslaved longer than we've actually been free. So many interesting statistics. It's so well done, deeply moving. It'll move you to tears, in fact, with articles and photography and facts and statistics and poetry. It's something that everyone should check out, and we'll definitely be talking about it more. So very well done there with that project. And guys, we're going to move on to California, where a video from a group of Southern California high school students has sparked outrage. The video shows them giving the Nazi salute while a German World War II era marching song played in the background. So Matt Gutman is on the ground with the latest. Matt?
Right behind me is the Pacifica High School, where a group of students attended who are believed to have taken part in this Nazi salute video that is now circulating. In that video, a Nazi marching tune is playing. One of the kids is actually singing it. Another kid is seen laughing. They do not appear to have been coerced into raising that Nazi salute. Now, the school says it is taking action. Apparently, the incident happened at an off-campus event, an athletic event. Reportedly, these kids were part of the water polo team. It may have been a banquet for the team. Now, the school refuses to say what kind of action it has taken against the kids. Were they forced to apologize? Were they disciplined in any way? We don't yet know. The video was taken in November 2018. The school found out about it in March 2019, and now obviously it's become viral. We asked the school further, what kind of actions might you have taken? They responded, they're using restorative practices to help the kids. When we asked them what that meant, they wouldn't say. What is so disturbing is that this is just one of a growing number of similar Nazi-related incidents, both in Orange County. There was a video like this put out earlier this year, a picture put out earlier this year, kids arrayed around what appears to be a beer pong table. Red plastic Dixie cup type cups were arrayed in a swastika. The kids around the table are raising a Nazi salute. But we're told from the ADL that this is happening all over the country. The number of these kinds of incidents has more than doubled over the past several years. Certainly something to be concerned about. Again, I'm Matt Gutman in Garden Grove, California. You're watching ABC News Live.
All right, thank you, Matt. And we move overseas to Russia, where information surrounding that mysterious nuclear explosion that killed 7 people off the northern coast has largely been secret. Now, 4 Russian nuclear monitoring stations have gone silent. So I want to bring in James Longman and our London bureau to explain this. Hey, James, good to see you. So these monitoring stations, as I understand, detect nuclear radiation. So why would they all of a sudden go quiet?
Good question, Kimberly. So far, an international nuclear watchdog has been in touch with these 4 stations to ask why exactly they've gone offline. They, in turn, have responded to say they're having, quote, communication and network issues. But it's not entirely clear that that is the case, especially since this has happened so soon after that nuclear blast in the north of Russia. The Kremlin have said they know nothing about it because, you know, nuclear radiation detection stations, according to the Kremlin, are not in their purview, which I think most Russia watchers would say they found that a little bit hard to believe. I actually today have been speaking with a Greenpeace activist in Moscow who I met when I was there last week to ask him what he thinks about this. And he said something interesting. He said that there are 2 stations which are relatively close to the blast site, which probably could detect radiation particles in the air if the wind was going in the right direction. So it looks like a cover-up if those 2 have been turned off. But the other 2 are a lot further away. In fact, one of them is actually out in Siberia, so it would be very unlikely for radiation and nuclear particles to travel that far. So it begs the question, why would they be turned off? Well, then we ask, well, could Russia be testing other stuff in the coming days, weeks and months? And that's why they've turned these particular radiation stations off. So, look, I think at the moment we're still searching for answers, but it all just feeds into this bigger issue, which is the total lack of information over the whole thing. You know, when I was up there, it wasn't actually the radiation that worried people in the long term. That went up by 4 to 16 times. It sounds a lot, but actually, as we kept repeating, nothing compared to previous disasters like Chernobyl at many thousands of times over a safe dosage of radiation. But the idea that Russia would keep the whole thing so quiet, be so secretive about it, issue orders for people to evacuate and then rescind those orders, I think that put people certainly on edge. And for these 4 stations to have gone dark, I think that worries people a little bit as well.
So just before we go, James, what happens next?
Well, we will continue to watch whether or not the Russians, you know, continue some of their nuclear testing. And I think, Kimberly, a really interesting context for all this is the end of a nuclear treaty between the United States and Russia. It kind of fell apart earlier this month. It's been in place since 1987, and the whole reason it exists is to stop the proliferation of these sorts of weapons. The fact that that treaty fell apart so soon after it, now the United States is testing missile systems that we haven't seen being tested since the Cold War, albeit not nuclear, but nevertheless similar systems to those used in the Cold War. And now we're seeing these extraordinarily complicated and dangerous technology being tested and failing in Russia. It all adds up to, I think, concern that we're now entering another arms race. Kimberly?
All right, James Longman, right there in our London bureau. Thank you so much for the updates. We appreciate it. And guys, we're moving to the social media giants, Facebook and Twitter. They're saying that China has been spreading disinformation on their platforms, disinformation that amplified messages that portray the pro-democracy protesters in Hong Kong as violent and extreme. And it caused Twitter and Facebook to remove several of these China-backed accounts. So I want to bring in Jeremy Kaplan, who's the editor-in-chief of Digital Trends. Jeremy, good to see you. So Twitter said in a statement that based on their intensive investigations, they have reliable evidence to support that it was a coordinated state-backed operation. How do they even begin to figure this out?
Well, thanks for having me on the show. It's always great to be here. There's a couple of different signals that they look for to identify this type of activity. One is just patterns of activity, groups of accounts that are collectively spreading the information and connecting to each other in a certain way. And over the years of seeing this type of activity, dating back to 2016, the elections, of course, these social networks have gotten better at seeing and identifying these types of activities. The other thing is some of the locations for some of these accounts, which came directly from within China, even though the Chinese people themselves can't get onto the social networks, which is certainly a red flag that I know that Twitter noticed and looked at.
Yeah, that's one thing I was going to ask you, because Facebook and Twitter are banned in China. So who exactly were they trying to reach?
Yeah, that's what's really interesting about this. As we reported on Digital Trends, virtual private networks, VPNs, are tools that people within repressive regimes like China often use to overcome some of the government's misinformation campaigns. In this case, the Chinese government itself is using those VPNs to spread this type of information. So who are they targeting? They're not targeting the Chinese people because they can't see this stuff. This is just a classic propaganda misinformation campaign straight out of the 1950s. They're trying to sway the people around the world who have seen some sympathy for the Hong Kong protesters. China is doing everything it can to shift that sentiment online through campaigns like this.
Yeah, so this sounds very familiar to Americans because obviously it's similar to what happened with Russia and our U.S. elections. How are these platforms working to make sure that this doesn't happen?
Well, it's a real challenge. It's a thorn in their side. Let's be clear about that. Twitter, I think it's very interesting that Twitter is the one that identified this at first. Twitter often feels like the little brother to Facebook here. So Twitter is the one that identified the problem and then brought it over to Facebook and said, we've seen this, what can you do? I think they are getting better at identifying this type of activity, especially through that sort of pattern matching, looking for misinformation that supports other types of misinformation. However, governments and rogue agents, whoever it is that's doing this type of thing, is getting smarter and using it in new and different ways. So it's a constant game of catch-up that, let's be clear, none of these social networks are doing effectively enough. So they're doing more, they're getting better, and the people they're trying to battle against are getting smarter at the same time. It's a tough battle they're facing.
Definitely. All right, Jeremy Kaplan, editor-in-chief of Digital Trends, thanks so much for joining us today. And guys, before we go, this story is only cool because no one got hurt. Imagine this, you get home from dinner and you notice the door is open and there's something in the kitchen and it's a bear. So check this out.
You're looking into the Sherman's family Nest camera, an average look into what seemingly is an average living room. But oh, this is where it gets a little interesting.
When we got back from dinner, we came in through the garage because we were riding our hoverboards, and we accidentally left the garage door open.
Mr. Bear comes on in and counter-surfs for a little bit while Hayes Sherman and his friend Bobby Harden are in the other room.
At first, I thought maybe it was his mom, but it was getting so aggressive that we thought this could be a bear.
The bear isn't happy with what he's seeing on the counter, so he decides to open the fridge for a midnight snack.
I called the Placer County Sheriff, and I was on 911 on my watch, meanwhile we both had to be quiet and hold the door.
While they're trying to get help, the bear goes through the fridge, picks up a Tupperware of leftovers, and lays down in the living room, devouring all of their taco meat.
The bear took 2 Ben & Jerry's pints from our freezer and shredded them open.
I spoke with the deputy who helped get the bear out of the house.
I could see the bear inside, and then the homeowner was in an upstairs bedroom talking to me through an open window.
She was able to free the bear by opening the front door.
As far as safety goes, locking doors is #1. That's paramount. Lock residence doors, lock vehicle doors, and just know that bears have a really keen sense of smell.
Not only does this family have one unforgettable memory, the bear also left them with a parting gift.
It left us a big present on our carpet. My mom called 4 carpet cleaning services and none of them wanted to clean it up, so she did it herself.
Okay, I retract my earlier statement. This story is not cool. It's actually absolutely terrifying, but I'm glad that everyone was okay, and we want to give a shout out to KXTV for that story. All right, guys, continue to take care of yourselves, and if you're around, you can stick around for the briefing room at 3:30 p.m., then check out World News Prime at 8 p.m., and if you want to stay updated on all of these headlines, you can go to abcnews.com or download the app. I'm Kimberly Brooks, and I'll see you tomorrow.